Those who have not read Stephen King's The Dark Tower have forgotten the faces of their father, and I'm here to help them remember as we talk about why you should read Stephen King's The Dark Tower. The quickest way to learn about a new place is to know what it dreams of. In this universe, there might grow roses which sing. As for the end of the universe, I say let it come as it will, in ice, fire, or darkness. What did the universe ever do for me that I should mind its welfare? Ka was a wheel. It was also a net from which none ever escaped. Ka works and the world moves on. All of Midworld had become one vast haunted mansion in these strange latter days. It had become a wasteland, haunting and haunted. Shall we tell the truth then, you and I? No more lies? Not as friends but as equals? Only equals speak the truth. Friends and lovers lie endlessly caught in a web of regard. How infinite was love, twining in and out of hope and memory like a braid with 3 strong strands, so much the bright tower of every human's life and soul. The man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Long days and pleasant nights, my Ka babies. I am Mike of House Eld, and here today to talk to you a little bit about Cy King's The Dark Tower series. Now, I think that this is something that I have been talking about on the channel for a long time. When I did my favorite fantasy series of all time, people were kind of stunned to see how highly I have The Dark Tower ranked, because I've kind of developed this this identity over time as someone who doesn't like it, when, as you can see, it is a series that is very influential to my life. So I want to talk about not only that, but why you should read it. Now, just off the front here, there's going to be no spoilers in this. This is really a light sales job, is what the Why You Should Read series is about. It's just where I talk about what the series has meant to me and why I think that maybe you would be interested in it. And I think you can kind of take what I talk about here and decide if that sounds like it is something for you. So no worries if you haven't read the series yet. No worries if you haven't read all of Stephen King yet, or any Stephen King. I'm here today to talk about just The Dark Tower and why you should read it. But before we do, let me do a quick little rundown of the series. It was released over the course of 34 years, beginning in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Don't you guys know that one? That's just well and loved magazine. Started in 78 and it ended in 81, where Stephen King would just kind of release a section of the first book, The Gunslinger, over the course of that time. And then in 1982, he released The Gunslinger, and that's where we kind of start here. So it ran from 78 to 2004, being the release of the 7th and final book in the series. He did revisit the series in 2012 for a non-chronological book in the series, and we'll talk about it, but that is presumably going to be King's last visit to the tower. There are lots of comics and graphic novels and things like that to go over as well, but today we're just going to talk about the books and why I think that you should read. A little background for myself here. I became a constant reader back in the 90s, and I read pretty much everything that my school library had at the time, which, believe it or not, was quite a bit. Just about everything he had except The Dark Tower. So I just kind of always shrugged it off, and I'm not going to lie, at that age, teenager in high school, I had kind of moved past fantasy. I wasn't reading fantasy anymore. I kind of looked at that as like something I did in my preteen years, and I wasn't really interested in it. I mean, I was like, I still love Lord of the Rings. I'll still occasionally pick that up and read it once in a while, but I was pretty much done with the fantasy genre. I thought that I was never going to go back to it. So my high school was all Stephen King, Anne Rice, and Michael Crichton. That was pretty much all that I read. So by that time in 1997, when Wizard and Glass came out, that was the 4th book in this Dark Tower series. I was a member of his book club at the time and saw that I was going to be getting shipped a copy of this book. I said, okay, well, I guess I'm just not going to not read it. So I went to some used bookstores and I dug up some paperbacks of the first 3 novels and read them in a couple of days. And it was really, that's why I will always credit this series as being what brought me back into fantasy, because it was after this that I got right back into fantasy as a whole. Something I don't get is that this series is kind of a lot of people have kind of contradicted the idea that it's fantasy. They say it's more science fiction than fantasy. And I say, well, there's a fine line there. Where do you draw the fine line? Does fantasy, does it have to mean swords and shields, or does it just mean magics and warlocks and demons and dragons and stuff? Because it has most of that stuff in it. So I'm not really sure exactly what you would classify as the fantasy genre, but to me, it always is going to fall under fantasy. But enough about that background aside. Let's get into why I think you should read The Dark Tower, and let's start with what is it about? We start with a man named Roland Deschain, and he is the last in a long line of a knightly order known as gunslingers. Now, he is traveling across a post-apocalyptic landscape referred to as Midworld in pursuit of this mythical man in black to get information about an elusive magical edifice known as the Dark Tower. Midworld shares many similarities with our world, but an American Old West setting with fantastical elements, including demons, magic, and all types of beasties. On his quest to find and protect the mythical Dark Tower, which is said to be the nexus of all of the universes, he makes companions and faces many a foe along the way, and faces the long looming threat of the Crimson King. Now, if that seems very vague, it's because it is. Like I said, I'm trying to do non-spoiler with this. And the thing is that is a very poor representation of what this series does. Yes, it is an overarching kind of quick, someone says, sell me the Dark Tower in a paragraph. That maybe is what you would do. But this series is so much more than that. And if you read it, you'll be very, very much surprised about that description, because that's like saying The Wheel of Time is about Moraine. It's just like, it's not at all. But, I can see how they can sell it that way. So yeah, this series takes so many sharp left turns that I really cannot justify saying that's what the series is about, but that's the best way that I can tell you without moving into what makes it good or bad. I'm not going to lie to you here. The reception for this series is mixed, and there is a reason for that. There are some people who say that the plot is just way too confusing. And I say, I don't think that there's very many fantasy stories who don't have a confusing plot at some points. I think the trouble with that is that this kind of takes place in what feels like our setting, and people have a hard time grasping that there are fantastical elements in like our world kind of setting, and that's harder for them to get behind, where when you have knights and dragons and wizards and stuff flying around. So I can see why that might be something that comes up. But to me, I don't think that that's really a big criticism for me. Look, if anything, I think that what makes this series good is that it's Stephen freaking King writing fantasy. I mean, this has been one of the most recognized and inspirational American writers for almost 50 years now. So you're telling me that my favorite author of all time is going to write some fantasy? Well, sign me up. Obviously, it's not a very hard sales job on me. The only reason I skipped them when they first came out was because, one, I was too young for the earlier ones, but my high school library didn't have them at the time, and my mom was scared to let me have Stephen King stuff in the house because she thought it was satanic, right? Watch my How I Became a Constant Reader video for more on that. I think it's very clear that King was inspired by three things when he did this. Sergio Leone's The Man with No Name trilogy, that's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint Eastwood, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and the Arthurian legend, because it is a very, very crazy mashup of all three of those things. So again, if you're saying you don't see fantastical elements in this, I don't know what you're looking for really. But one of the best things about the series to me is the mystery, not only and the lore, but a mystery about the lore. It feels very much like a post-apocalyptic version of our world, but it also feels like our past in an American Western setting. So it's just got so many layers where you're just like, all right, what happened here? What happened to make this like this? They don't pay attention to time anymore. There's, sometimes the sun rises in the wrong place and sets in the wrong place. What is going on? What happened to this world that they now not only feels post-apocalyptic, but it also feels like it takes place in our past? That is a huge hook right from the beginning. We were trying to figure out what exactly happened here, because you see things that make it recognizable to our world, but it's, you see. So there's all kinds of mysteries. Who is this man in black? What does Roland want with him? What does the Dark Tower actually do? What is the significance of the number 19? What in the world is the Crimson King? And here's the thing is you have those hooks, but it doesn't give you the answers all at once, but it also doesn't just drop you into it so deep that you're like, I have no idea what's going on. I can't enjoy this at all. You get your little answers along the way. It's like you get your bites and you get more questions. And I think that is the perfect way to do a series like this because it makes the journey feel like it's worth going. And that's probably the biggest plus for the series to me. I also love the obviously the characters are going to be the biggest one here. I mean, they have everything from the anti-hero, the junkie, the activist, and the whole coming of age young man in the book. So I mean, you've got always, anytime King is going to do a coming of age story, I'm interested. But now you're going to fill that around in a world that's not quite ours and around these kinds of influences. So yeah, without getting too much into it here, this is just such a diverse cast of characters that I don't feel like I've seen in any other type of fantasy series. I feel like so many fantasy series, you can see, okay, I like this character, and this character. They remind me of blank, blank, and blank from this series and that series. I don't think there's any other series where you can compare these characters to any of those characters. They definitely stand on their own, and even the people who say they have a hard time with King's storytelling style, they'll usually agree that his character development is usually on point, though, and that is definitely the case here. Because I look at the way Jake and Susanna and Eddie and Roland were at the beginning of this book, and I'm like, wow, there's totally different people by the end. And it's, again, just beautiful character arcs that make this journey worth going on. You know, worth your time, worth the reading. There's a lot of high speech in here. And the high speech, I've seen a lot of series where they just make up a bunch of words to try to sound, a bunch of words that you can't even pronounce to try to sound intelligent and say, oh yeah, this is the old tongue and things like that. And sometimes it works, Tolkien, and sometimes it don't. I'm not going to mention the series because it'll make people mad. Sometimes I don't feel like it works, and I'll just glaze over those things because I'm like, look, you already got like 400 characters in your book. You don't need to give me their alternate names. You don't need to give me their old speech names. You don't need to give me their old speech titles. Things like that really start to annoy me. But this, it feels like it could be basically just proper English from our time, but also like mispronounced or maybe some slang over time, and that's just kind of adjusted over the ages to how people kind of say them a little bit wrong, but they're similar and somewhat familiar to what we say. So that's a compelling way to do this high speech for me for the characters that know it and will actually speak it from time to time. What I said about the characters being so different from anything else, I think that also helps to eliminate the whole I'm tired of fantasy tropes thing. I don't think you're going to find very many fantasy tropes in this. You might find something that you find somewhat familiar, but I never think you're going to be like, oh, yep, saw that coming. This happens in every single Joseph Campbell hero's journey story. I don't think so at all. I never saw that with this, and that's kind of what kept this fresh, is because I had no idea where it was going the whole time. But the ending to this thing, this is where I'm going to kind of get into the not so positive things. The ending of the series is highly divisive. All right, now I'm going to say when the last book came out in 2004, constant readers were almost unanimously pissed off. They did not like what happened in books 6 and 7, especially 7. Especially the ending. You'll understand if you ever read this. Over time, I feel like that has kind of calmed down. And I almost feel like the people who have stood their ground on that are actually the minority now. And most people are happy with the ending. I've heard many people say they think it's perfect now that they think about it. And I'm like, well, it's been 15 years and I'm still upset about it. But here's the thing. I've kind of gotten painted with the strokes of, yeah, Mike likes the Dark Tower, but he hates the ending. No, look, I don't hate the ending. Here's my thing. I had things I did not care, decisions that King made in books 6 and 7 that really started to take me out of the story. I can't really go into detail without spoiling for you, but if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about. That really, really just took me out of the story, and it bogged some things down. The actual ending, fine with. I thought it was fine. It was fine. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I didn't like just some revelations at the end, but again, that's going to be your mileage may vary on that. But I did not hate this series. Obviously, this is a series that I adore. I mean, put it in my top 5 fantasy series of all time because those first 5 books are immaculate. I think that they're just fantastic. I have my issues with 6 and 7, but they're still mostly good. So there. It seems like these days you either have to give something undying praise or you hate it. And that's definitely not the case. I absolutely adore this series. And again, don't think just because I had those problems that you're going to have them, because I seem to be in the minority of people who did not care for them at this point. So there we go. So I'm saying the series is certainly not going to be for everyone, especially casuals. But the pros vastly outweigh the cons for me personally. But what about you? Well, it brings me to why we are here and why you should read it. I mentioned it kind of briefly before. If you've gotten tired of the T word in fantasy, and that is trope, this is certainly going to be the experience that you're looking for, I think. It's going to be just different enough, and it's going to have enough mysteries and hooks that you're going to want to keep going. You're going to be intrigued enough that you're going to want to keep going. The question I get the most on all of my Stephen King videos is not only where should I start with them, but the second most asked is, can I start with The Dark Tower? I say you can, but I would highly advise against it. And there's a reason for that. And that is because the Dark Tower series, basically, it is what holds the Stephen King multiverse together. It's the connective tissue, one might say. There's so many references and connections to his other works that, it won't ruin the story for you if you miss it. But it's so much more rewarding if you know those references, especially when a huge character from one of his earliest books shows up to be a part of the main cast later in the series, as well as, one of the main villains being someone let's just say if you've read some of his earlier works, might be very familiar. Remember that whole turtle scene from It? Yeah, it makes more sense now. So yes, a casual can pick up this series and read it and enjoy it, I think. And you won't recognize some of those references. You'll be like, what was that about? But you also just think, it's just King being zany like King can be. But it's rewarding if you know where those things are coming from, if you've read everything like I have. So much more stuff, not only in The Dark Tower makes sense, but some stuff of those later books that he wrote after Dark Tower were starting to make sense. Like I know people who saw Dr. Sleep and are like, Ka is a wheel, what the hell does that mean? Well, that's just a shout out to the Dark Tower fans. So I definitely don't think you should start here, but if you are a Stephen King fan and you've never read The Dark Tower, you've probably gotten the sense that there's like this fully fleshed out mythology behind the pages sometimes when you're reading some of his stories. And it is. It's there for a reason, and it's answered in The Dark Tower. So if you haven't read all this stuff, I think you'll have plenty to explore and draw those connections to. And it'll be something like I always get with Wheel of Time where they say, in a reread, you're going to catch this, this, and this. Same deal here. You don't have to read all that stuff to read Dark Tower, but it helps a lot. It helps a lot, especially something like The Stand and Salem's Lot. Those are some big ones that I think would really, really help. Insomnia actually matters quite a bit, too, later in the series. So there are big, big connections. And, I'll get into those when I do my Into the Multiverse reviews for each one of these books because I love to talk about the connections within his greater multiverse. In the end, if you do decide to read the series, I'm going to give you the stipulation that you probably need to read the first 2 books. The first book is not only does it seem kind of pacing seems a little bit weird because, like I said, it was released in 5 parts over a couple years in a magazine. And I know he did that revised and expanded edition where he cleaned some things up, tried to make it more coherent. It's basically The Gunslinger is just a prologue to the story, and it is not a representation of where the series goes at all. I say you need to read the first 2 because if you get to about the second half of book 2, you're going to keep going and you're not going to look back because you're going to be so compelled and intrigued to want to know what in the world just happened that you're going to keep going. So guys, that is where I think if you read that far, you're going to realize it's a journey worth taking. And that, guys, is why I think that you should read Stephen King's The Dark Tower. So look out next month. This month in July, I'm doing my Into the Multiverse is Cujo, but in August, I will be doing The Gunslinger. And since it had been so long since I had read those, 1997, I plan on rereading each Dark Tower book before I do that Into the Multiverse episode, just so I'm fresh on things. So yeah, I just reread Gunslinger, had a great time with it, and I'll be talking about it in August. But lots of people have been asking me about the Dark Tower, why it's so important to me. And guys, I just really can't say more than it's a hell of a journey. It's a hell of a journey, even if I have my problems with the way it ended. Yeah, it's still very much a journey worth taking. I'm looking forward to taking it again. If I hated this series, like some people have started to bring up, I don't think I'd be reading it and talking about it again. So guys, have you read The Dark Tower? Do you want to read The Dark Tower? You got any questions? Drop in the comments below and let me know, and I will talk to you then.